The sky above Zeta 7 was dark, heavy with the weight of two suns that hung low on the horizon. Their light barely reached the surface, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The mining colony nestled in the valley below seemed insignificant against the vastness of the planet. It was a small outpost, built to extract rare minerals from the ground and send them back to Earth. But now, it felt like a coffin. Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the bunker's reinforced door, his hands gripping the cold metal frame as he peered outside. His face was weathered, marked by years of hard labor and harsh conditions. Lines creased his forehead, and his jaw was tight with tension. He didn't need to look far to see the signs of destruction. The Vraxan warships loomed overhead, massive and menacing, their sleek black hulls blotting out what little sunlight remained. Below them, drones scoured the landscape, tearing through everything in their path. Behind Ethan, the other colonists huddled together in the dimly lit control room. Some sat on the floor clutching makeshift weapons or tools they hoped would offer some protection. Others paced nervously, muttering prayers under their breath. The air smelled of sweat and fear, thick enough to choke on. Among them was Claire Bennett, a biologist who had been stationed here for research purposes. She wasn't trained for combat, but she had proven herself resourceful since the attack began. Her blonde hair was tied back into a messy ponytail, and her green eyes darted around the room as if searching for answers no one else could see. "They're not stopping," Ethan said, his voice low and gravelly. "They've already taken out half our defenses." Claire nodded, though she didn't look up from the datapad in her hands. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, pulling up schematics and calculations. "They're methodical," she replied. "Every move they make is calculated. They're not just destroying us, they're erasing us." Ethan turned to face her, his expression grim. "What do you mean?" "They're targeting every structure, every piece of equipment we have," Claire explained. "It's not just about killing us, they want to make sure there's nothing left behind. No evidence we were ever here." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He had seen plenty of battles during his time in space, but this was different. The Vraxan weren't raiders looking for resources or territory. They were exterminators, wiping out anything that stood in their way. And right now the colonists were nothing more than insects beneath their boots. "We tried contacting Earth," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his short gray hair. "No response. We're on our own." Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Maybe there's another option." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Another option? What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "There's a legend, an old story among scientists. It says there's one thing the Vraxan fear more than anything else." Ethan frowned. "And what's that?" "A human." For a moment, Ethan stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or shout. "A human? That's your brilliant plan? We summon a person and somehow that scares them off?" "It's not just any human," Claire insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It has to be someone who embodies unpredictability, someone who fights without logic or restraint, someone who reminds them why humans are dangerous." Ethan shook his head. "You're talking nonsense. Even if that worked, how do you expect us to find such a person? We don't exactly have a list of unpredictable warriors lying around." "We don't need a list," Claire said firmly. "We send out a signal, a distress call encoded. With specific frequencies, if there's anyone nearby who fits the description, they'll respond." "And what happens if they don't?" Ethan asked. "Then we die trying," Claire shot back, "because sitting here waiting for them to finish us off isn't much of a plan either." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of an explosion cut him off. The ground shook violently, sending debris raining down from the ceiling. Outside, another drone had breached the perimeter fence, its glowing red eyes scanning the area for survivors. "Fine," Ethan growled. "Do it. But if this doesn't work, I'm blaming you." Claire didn't waste time responding. She rushed to the communications console, her fingers flying over the controls. The others watched in silence, too scared to interrupt. After several tense minutes, she activated the beacon. A faint hum filled the room as the signal pulsed outward, reaching beyond the atmosphere and into the void of space. "There," she said, stepping back. "It's done." Now all they could do was wait. Minutes passed like hours. The Vraxen continued their assault, inching closer to the bunker with each passing second. Inside, the colonists clung to whatever hope they could muster. Some prayed silently, while others held loved ones close, whispering reassurances they didn't fully believe themselves. Ethan paced back and forth, his rifle slung over his shoulder, ready to fight until the bitter end. Claire stayed near the console, staring at the blinking light that indicated the signal was still active. Doubt gnawed at her mind, but she refused to let it show. She had to believe this would work. They had no other choice. Then, just as despair threatened to consume them, something changed. A strange vibration rippled through the air, followed by a blinding flash of light. Everyone shielded their eyes as a portal opened in the sky, crackling with energy. From it emerged a figure clad in battered armor, holding a rifle slung across his back. He landed gracefully on the barren soil, his boots kicking up dust as he surveyed the scene. His sharp green eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the devastation around him. Without hesitation, he strode toward the bunker, his presence commanding attention even before he spoke. "What's the situation?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. Claire stepped forward, relief washing over her face. "You came," the man nodded. "I did. Now tell me what I'm dealing with." Ethan approached cautiously, studying the newcomer with a mix of skepticism and admiration. "Who are you?" "My name's Daniel Hayes," the man replied, "and I'm here to help." As Daniel introduced himself, Ethan couldn't help but notice the confidence radiating from him. There was something about the way he carried himself. Calm, yet alert, fearless yet calculating. That made Ethan think maybe, just maybe, they had a chance after all. But the battle was far from over. The Vraxen were closing in, and time was running out. For now, though, the arrival of Daniel Hayes gave the colonists a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments humanity's resilience could shine through. Daniel Hayes didn't waste time with introductions. He moved through the bunker with purpose, his eyes scanning every corner as if memorizing the layout. His armor was scratched and dented, evidence of countless battles fought and survived. A rifle hung loosely from his shoulder, its barrel worn but well maintained. Despite the chaos around him, Daniel exuded calm, a stark contrast to the panicked colonists who stared at him with a mix of awe and disbelief. Ethan Carter watched him carefully, unsure what to make of this stranger. "You're just one guy," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "How are you supposed to stop them?" Daniel stopped mid-step and turned to face Ethan. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glint of amusement in his green eyes. "I'm not here to play fair," he replied. "Fair doesn't win wars. I'm here to fight dirty." Claire Bennett stepped forward, clutching her data pad tightly. She had spent the last hour explaining the situation to Daniel, detailing the Vraxen's tactics and their relentless efficiency. Now she looked up at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "What do you need us to do?" she asked. "Stay alive," Daniel said simply. "That's your job. Leave the rest to me." Before anyone could respond, he grabbed his rifle and headed for the bunker's exit. Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance before following him. They couldn't afford to sit idly while Daniel took on the Vraxen alone. If this man truly was their only chance, they needed to be part of the effort, even if it meant risking their lives. Outside, the scene was grim. The Vraxen drones patrolled the area in precise patterns, their glowing red sensors sweeping back and forth. The ground was littered with debris, shattered equipment, twisted metal, and charred remains of structures that had once been part of the colony. Smoke rose into the sky, mingling with the oppressive shadows cast by the twin suns. Daniel, crouched behind a jagged rock formation, studying the drone's movements, his lips curled into a faint smirk. "Predictable," he muttered under his breath. "What's predictable?" Ethan whispered, crouching beside him. "They're patterns. Daniel replied. They're efficient, sure, but efficiency breeds predictability, and predictability is something I can exploit. Without waiting for further questions, Daniel raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed across the barren landscape, hitting one of the drones squarely in a weak point near its base. Sparks flew as the machine staggered, its movements faltering. Before it could recover, Daniel fired again, this time aiming for a critical joint. With a loud metallic groan, the drone collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The other drones immediately shifted their focus, turning toward the source of the attack. Their sensors locked onto Daniel's position and they began advancing in unison. Now what? Claire hissed, gripping the edge of the rock for support. Now we run, Daniel said, already moving. He darted from cover to cover, firing sporadically to keep the drones off balance. Each shot was deliberate, targeting specific weak points that seemed almost invisible to the untrained eye. Ethan and Claire followed close behind, their hearts pounding as they dodged blasts of energy from the drone's weapons. You're insane, Ethan shouted over the noise of explosions. It's called improvisation, Daniel called back without slowing down. Keeps them guessing. As they reached another cluster of rocks, Daniel paused to reload his rifle. He glanced at Ethan and Claire, both of whom were breathing heavily. You two holding up okay? We're fine, Claire snapped, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. But this isn't sustainable. There are too many of them. Daniel nodded. True. That's why we need to change the game. How? Ethan demanded. Instead of answering, Daniel pulled a small device from his belt. It looked like a grenade, but instead of an explosive charge, it emitted a high-pitched frequency when activated. Cover your ears, he instructed. Before either of them could ask why, Daniel hurled the device toward the nearest group of drones. The moment it hit the ground, a deafening screech filled the air. The sound waves disrupted the drone's internal systems, causing them to malfunction. Several toppled over, their limbs twitching uncontrollably, while others froze entirely, immobilized by the interference. That should buy us some time, Daniel said, standing up. Ethan stared at him, incredulous. Where did you even get something like that? I made it, Daniel replied with a shrug. You learn a lot when you're out here long enough. Claire shook her head, trying to process what she had just witnessed. This isn't how wars are supposed to be fought. Exactly, Daniel said, grinning. Which is why it works. Despite his confidence, the situation remained dire. The main Vraxan ship still hovered above the colony, its massive form casting an ominous shadow over the battlefield. From its underside, more drones began descending, replacing those that had been destroyed. We can't keep doing this forever, Claire said, her voice tinged with desperation. There's no end to them. Daniel frowned, his gaze fixed on the ship. She's right, he admitted. We need to take out the source. The ship? Ethan asked. How do you propose we do that? It's huge. Daniel tapped his chin thoughtfully. Not necessarily the whole thing, just something vital, something that'll cripple their operations. Claire's eyes widened as realization dawned on her. The central core, she said. Every Vraxan ship has a central core that controls all its systems. If we disable it, the entire operation will collapse. Good, Daniel said, nodding approvingly. Now we just need a way to get close enough to plant a charge. And how do you plan to do that? Ethan asked skeptically. Daniel grinned. Distraction, lots of it. Back inside the bunker, the trio worked quickly to prepare for the next phase of their plan. Claire gathered materials to assemble a makeshift explosive device while Ethan scavenged additional weapons and ammunition. Daniel, meanwhile, studied the layout of the ship using data from Claire's earlier scans. We'll need to split up, Daniel said, pointing to a map displayed on a cracked monitor. Claire, you'll stay here and monitor the ship's movements. Let us know if anything changes. Ethan, you'll create diversions, explosions, noise, anything to draw their attention away from me. I'll handle the core. Ethan frowned. Why do I get stuck playing bait? Because you're better at making noise than sneaking, Daniel replied bluntly. No offense. Ethan opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he grabbed a satchel filled with explosives and slung it over his shoulder. Fine, but if I die out there, I'm haunting you. Daniel chuckled. Duly noted. As night fell over Zeta 7, the temperature dropped sharply, adding another layer of discomfort to an already unbearable situation. The colonists huddled together in the bunker, watching anxiously as Daniel and Ethan prepared to leave. Claire stayed glued to her console, her fingers flying over the keys as she tracked the Vraxen's movements. Ready? Daniel asked, adjusting the strap of his rifle. As ready as I'll ever be, Ethan replied, forcing a grin. With a final nod, the two men stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness. Claire watched them go, her heart heavy with worry. For the first time since the invasion began, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. Daniel moved silently through the shadows, his every step calculated to avoid detection. Behind him, Ethan set off a series of controlled explosions, drawing the drone's attention away from the ship. The distraction worked. Most of the drones flocked toward the commotion, leaving the perimeter around the ship relatively clear. Reaching the hull, Daniel scaled the rocky terrain until he found a maintenance hatch. Using a handheld tool, he pried it open and slipped inside, careful to minimize noise. Inside the ship, the air was cold and sterile, illuminated by pulsing blue lights that lined the walls. He navigated the corridors cautiously, relying on Claire's directions to guide him to the central core. Along the way, he encountered several Vraxen soldiers, their sleek black armor gleaming in the dim light. Each encounter ended swiftly, with Daniel dispatching his foes, using a combination of stealth and brute force. Finally, he reached the core chamber. The room was vast, dominated by a massive sphere suspended in the center. Energy coursed through it in intricate patterns, powering the entire ship. Daniel attached the explosive device to the sphere's base, setting the timer for 5 minutes. As he finished, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Vraxen had discovered the breach. Time to go, Daniel muttered, sprinting back the way he came. Outside, Ethan continued his assault, keeping the drones occupied. When Daniel emerged from the ship, he signaled for Ethan to fall back. Together, they raced toward the bunker, the countdown ticking in their ears. Inside, Claire waited anxiously, her eyes glued to the screen. "Did you do it?" she asked as they burst through the door. "Yeah," Daniel replied, catching his breath. "Now let's see if it works." Seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The central core detonated, sending shockwaves through the vessel. The drones on the ground powered down instantly, their connections severed. Above them, the ship listed dangerously, smoke pouring from its damaged hull. For a moment, there was silence. Then cheers erupted from the colonists, their voices echoing through the bunker. "We did it," Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. Daniel smiled faintly, leaning against the wall. Not bad for a day's work. But the victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, a new threat emerged, one that would test the explosion that tore through the Vraxen ship sent a shockwave rippling across the colony. The ground shook violently, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of collapsing metal and burning fuel. Inside the bunker, the colonists clung to each other, their cheers fading as reality set in. Yes, they had crippled the ship, but the battle was far from over. Daniel Hayes stood near the entrance, his rifle slung across his back, watching as the massive vessel tilted precariously. In the sky, its once smooth surface was now scarred with flames and smoke, but it wasn't falling. Not yet. Instead, it hovered stubbornly, its systems struggling to stay operational. "They're still up there," Ethan said, joining Daniel at the door. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but his voice carried a note of determination. "You think they'll retreat?" Daniel shook his head. "Not a chance. They're too proud for that." Claire approached them, her datapad glowing faintly in the dim light. "I'm picking up activity inside the ship," she said, her brow furrowed. "They're regrouping, preparing something." "What could they possibly do now?" Ethan asked, glancing nervously at the damaged vessel. "They don't give up easily," Daniel replied. And when they lose, they lash out harder. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they hit us with everything they've got left. Ethan groaned. So what's the plan this time? Another clever gadget? A bigger explosion? Daniel smirked. Something like that. But first, we need to make sure everyone here is ready. Back inside the bunker, the mood shifted from celebration to preparation. The colonists worked quickly, fortifying the structure as best they could. Some stacked crates and equipment to create makeshift barriers, while others distributed weapons scavenged from fallen drones. Even those who had never held a weapon before were given basic instructions on how to use one. Claire moved among them, offering words of encouragement and ensuring everyone stayed focused. Her calm demeanor helped steady nerves, though her own hands trembled slightly as she tightened the straps on her backpack. She knew the next few minutes would determine whether they lived or died, and she refused to let fear paralyze her. Meanwhile, Daniel gathered Ethan and a handful of volunteers near the main console. He spread out a crude map of the area, pointing to key locations. "We can't stay holed up in here forever," he said. "If they breach the bunker, we're done. So we fight on our terms out there." Ethan frowned. "Out there? Against whatever they throw at us? That's suicide." "It's better than waiting here for them to break through," Daniel countered. "Besides, I didn't come all this way to hide behind walls." One of the volunteers, a young man named Ryan, raised his hand hesitantly. "What about the rest of the colony? Shouldn't we try to evacuate?" Daniel shook his head. "There's no time. And even if there was, where would we go? No, our only option is to hold them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive, or for them to decide we're not worth the trouble." Ryan swallowed hard but nodded. "Understood." "Good," Daniel said. "Now listen up. Here's what we're going to do." The plan was simple yet risky. Claire and a small group of engineers would remain inside the bunker monitoring the Vraxins' movements and coordinating attacks. Meanwhile, Daniel, Ethan, and the volunteers would split into teams, setting traps and ambush points around the perimeter. Their goal was to keep the Vraxin forces divided and distracted, preventing them from mounting a concentrated assault on the bunker. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, wrapping the colony in an icy chill. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, leaving the landscape bathed in darkness. The only light came from the burning wreckage of the Vraxin ship, casting eerie shadows across the ground. Daniel led his team silently through the ruins, their footsteps muffled by the soft sand. Each person carried a weapon, though none felt truly prepared for what lay ahead. Still, they followed Daniel without hesitation, trusting his instincts and experience. "This is it," Daniel whispered, crouching behind a pile of rubble. Ahead, the Vraxin soldiers were assembling, a mix of drones and humanoid figures clad in sleek black armor. Their weapons gleamed in the dim light, and their movements were precise, almost mechanical. "There are too many of them," Ethan muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "That's why we don't fight fair," Daniel reminded him. "Stay low, stay quiet, and wait for my signal." The team spread out, taking cover behind rocks and debris. From the bunker, Claire's voice crackled over their comms. "They're moving toward your position. Be ready." Seconds later, the Vraxin advanced, their boots crunching against the ground. They moved in tight formation, scanning the area for threats. Daniel watched them carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the lead soldier passed within range, Daniel gave the signal. A volley of gunfire erupted from the shadows, catching the Vraxin off guard. Several soldiers went down immediately, their armor pierced by well-placed shots. Chaos broke out as the remaining troops scrambled to return fire, their disciplined formation crumbling under the unexpected attack. "Fall back," Daniel shouted, already retreating to a new position. His team followed, firing sporadically to cover their escape. The Vraxin pursued, their weapons blazing, but Daniel's unpredictable tactics kept them guessing. He led them into a series of narrow alleyways formed by collapsed structures, forcing them to advance single file. "Now!" Daniel yelled. Hidden explosives detonated along the path, sending chunks of rock and debris tumbling onto the pursuing soldiers. The narrow space amplified the blast, trapping several Vraxen beneath the rubble. That should slow them down, Ethan said, reloading his rifle. For now, Daniel replied, scanning the area. But they'll adapt. We need to keep moving. While Daniel and his team engaged the enemy outside, Claire coordinated additional strikes from the bunker. Using the colony's remaining drones, repurposed and armed with makeshift explosives, she launched surprise attacks on the Vraxen's rear lines. The drones buzzed overhead, dropping payloads with deadly accuracy before self-destructing to avoid capture. They're getting desperate, Claire reported over the comms. Their formations are breaking apart. Good work, Daniel said, ducking behind cover as another wave of Vraxen soldiers advanced. Keep hitting them where it hurts. The battle raged on, neither side gaining a decisive advantage. For every Vraxen soldier taken down, 2 more seemed to appear, their numbers seemingly endless. Exhaustion began to take its toll on the human defenders, their movements growing slower and less precise. We can't keep this up much longer, Ethan said, wiping blood from a cut above his eyebrow. Daniel nodded grimly. We don't have to. Just a little longer. What happens then? Ethan asked. You'll see, Daniel replied cryptically. Inside the bunker, Claire noticed something unusual on her screen. Energy readings from the Vraxen ship were spiking, far beyond normal levels. At first, she thought it might be a wee malfunction caused by the earlier damage, but then she realized the truth. They're charging a weapon, Claire said urgently, her voice trembling. A big one. Daniel's tone hardened. How long? Minutes, maybe less. Then we finish this now. With renewed determination, Daniel rallied his team for one final push. They charged forward, meeting the Vraxen head-on in a brutal firefight. Bullets ricocheted off armor and energy blast lit up the night sky. Despite being outnumbered, the humans fought with ferocity born of desperation. In the chaos, Daniel spotted an opportunity. A lone Vraxen commander stood atop a ridge overseeing the battle. If they could eliminate him, it might disrupt the chain of command and buy them precious time. I'm going after him, Daniel said, sprinting toward the ridge. Wait, Ethan called after him, but Daniel was already gone. Dodging enemy fire, Daniel reached the base of the ridge and began climbing. The commander turned just as Daniel lunged, tackling him to the ground. The two grappled fiercely, their struggle illuminated by flashes of light from the ongoing battle below. With a final burst of strength, Daniel disarmed the commander and delivered a crushing blow, ending the fight. As the commander fell, so did the morale of the remaining Vraxen forces. Without leadership, their attacks became disjointed and ineffective. Now, Daniel shouted into his comm. From the bunker, Claire triggered the last of their traps, a network of EMP charges hidden throughout the battlefield. The pulses disabled the Vraxen's weapons and disrupted their communications, leaving them vulnerable. It was enough. The tide of the battle shifted decisively in favor of the humans. Breathing heavily, Daniel rejoined his team as the surviving Vraxen retreated toward their battered ship. The vessel groaned ominously, its damaged hull barely holding together. They're pulling back, Ethan said, lowering his rifle. For now, Daniel replied, watching the ship rise shakily into the sky. As the Vraxen disappeared into the stars, the colonists emerged from hiding, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. The victory was hard won, but it wasn't without cost. Lives had been lost, and the colony lay in ruins. Still, they had survived. Against all odds, humanity had prevailed. The Vraxen ship groaned as it ascended into the sky, its damaged hull trailing smoke and debris. It hovered for a moment, wobbling unsteadily, before disappearing into the void of space. The colonists watched in silence, their weapons still raised, half expecting the enemy to return. But the ship was gone, leaving behind only the scars of its attack, a wasteland of charred metal, shattered structures, and broken lives. Daniel Hayes stood near the edge of the colony, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His armor was battered, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his green eyes remained sharp and alert. He scanned the horizon one last time, ensuring no stragglers remained. When he was satisfied, he turned to face the others. "They're not coming back," he said simply. Ethan Carter exhaled a long breath, lowering his weapon. "You sure about that?" "They've had enough," Daniel replied. "They came here expecting an easy fight. Instead, they got something else. Us," Claire Bennett added, stepping forward. Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "They underestimated us." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. And now they know better." The colonists gathered around, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. Some embraced loved ones, tears streaming down their faces. Others sank to the ground, too drained to do anything but stare at the destruction around them. The battle may have ended, but the cost was heavy. Homes were destroyed, supplies were scarce, and many had lost friends or family members. Claire approached Ethan, who was leaning against a piece of rubble, his shoulders sagging under the weight of everything they had endured. "We made it," she said softly. "For now," Ethan replied, his tone grim. "But what happens next? We can't stay here. This place is ruined." "We'll figure it out," Claire insisted. "We always do." As dawn broke over Zeta 7, the twin suns cast a pale light across the desolate landscape. The survivors worked tirelessly to salvage what little remained of their colony. Equipment was repaired, supplies were rationed, and makeshift shelters were erected from whatever materials could be scavenged. Daniel observed the efforts quietly, standing apart from the others. He wasn't part of this community, not really. He had come to help, to fight, and now that the battle was over, he knew it was time to leave. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. "You did well," Claire said, approaching him. She held a canteen of water, offering it to him. Daniel accepted it with a nod. "So did you. All of you. You saved us," she continued. "Without you, we wouldn't have stood a chance." "I didn't do it alone," Daniel said, gesturing toward the colonists working together. "It was all of you. You fought when there was nothing left to fight for. That's what makes humans dangerous." Claire smiled faintly. "I guess we proved your point," Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, you did." There was a pause, the kind that comes when words are unnecessary but still carry meaning. Finally, Claire spoke again. "Will you stay? Just for a little while longer? We could use your help rebuilding." Daniel shook his head. "I can't. There are other places like this, other colonies that need someone to step in when things look hopeless. I'm not meant to stay in one spot for too long." Claire nodded, though disappointment flickered in her eyes. "I understand." Later that day, the portal reopened, its shimmering surface cutting through the quiet morning air. Daniel stood before it, his pack slung over his shoulder. Around him, the colonists gathered to say goodbye. Ethan stepped forward first, extending a hand. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "For everything." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "Take care of them." "I will," Ethan promised. Claire approached next, holding out a small data pad. "It's not much," she said. "Just some notes on the Vraxen, what we learned during the battle. Maybe it'll help you somewhere else." Daniel took the device, slipping it into his pocket. "Appreciate it." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful out there." "I always am," Daniel replied with a smirk. Before anyone else could speak, the portal began to hum louder, signaling its instability. Without another word, Daniel turned and stepped through, disappearing into the swirling energy. Moments later, the portal closed, leaving the colonists alone once more. In the days that followed, life slowly began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such devastation. The colonists worked together, pooling their skills and resources to rebuild. They fortified the bunker, expanded their defenses, and even started planting crops in the rocky soil. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of hope among them. They had faced the worst the universe could throw at them, and they had survived. More than that, they had triumphed, not because of superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but because of their resilience, creativity, and refusal to give up. Claire often thought about Daniel, wondering where he was and what battles he might be fighting. She hoped he was safe wherever he was. But more than that, she hoped he understood how much his arrival had meant to them. He hadn't just saved their lives. He had reminded them of who they were and what they were capable of. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Ethan joined Claire on a hill overlooking the colony. Together they watched the stars appear one by one, filling the sky with light. "He was right, you know," Ethan said after a long silence. "About what?" Claire asked. "About humans, being dangerous, unpredictable. That's why they fear us." Claire smiled. "And that's why we'll keep surviving." Ethan nodded. "No matter what comes next. The colony of Zeta 7 would never be the same. Its scars ran deep, both in the land and in the hearts of those who called it home. But it was also stronger now, forged in the fires of adversity. The colonists had learned that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about fighting back, about refusing to let despair define them. And somewhere out there, beyond the stars, Daniel Hayes moved on to his next mission. He didn't seek recognition or reward. For him, it was enough to know that he had made a difference, that he had reminded humanity of its greatest strength. Because in the vastness of the universe, where countless species vied for dominance, there was one thing no one could ever truly extinguish: the spirit of humanity. The portal closed behind Daniel Hayes, leaving him standing in a desolate stretch of rocky terrain. He exhaled deeply, his breath visible in the cold air as he adjusted the strap of his pack. The battle on Zeta 7 was over, but Daniel knew there would always be another fight waiting somewhere else. It was the life he had chosen, or perhaps the life that had chosen him. He glanced at the horizon, where two suns hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. This new planet felt eerily similar to Zeta 7, though quieter. Too quiet. The silence pressed against him like a weight, and he instinctively tightened his grip on his rifle. Something wasn't right. Daniel moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly against the dry ground. His eyes scanned the area, taking in every detail. The jagged cliffs to his left, the scattered boulders ahead, the faint trail of smoke rising in the distance. Smoke meant people, or at least something worth investigating. As he approached the source, the scene came into view. A small settlement nestled between the cliffs, its structures crude but functional. From a distance, it looked abandoned, with no signs of movement or life. But Daniel knew better than to trust appearances. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing across the empty space. No response. Crouching behind a rock, he studied the layout. The buildings were made of scrap metal and reinforced panels, clearly designed for defense rather than comfort. Barricades lined the perimeter, though they seemed hastily constructed and partially damaged. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't ended well. Daniel stepped forward, keeping his weapon ready. As he entered the settlement, the signs of chaos became clearer. Broken doors hung off their hinges, furniture lay overturned, and scorch marks marred the walls. It looked like the aftermath of an attack, but by whom? And where were the survivors? Faint sound caught his attention. A low groan coming from one of the larger buildings. Daniel froze, listening intently before moving toward the noise. Inside, he found a man lying on the floor, his face pale and streaked with dirt. Blood-soaked, through a makeshift bandage wrapped around his side. "Hey," Daniel said sharply, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered open, revealing glassy eyes filled with pain. "You human?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "What happened here?" "The Vraxen," the man whispered, clutching Daniel's arm weakly. "They came looking for someone." "For who?" The man hesitated as if unsure whether to speak. Finally, he muttered, "Her." Before Daniel could ask more, the man went limp, his hand slipping away. Dead. Frustrated but undeterred, Daniel searched the rest of the settlement. He found no other survivors, only more bodies, each bearing wounds inflicted by advanced weaponry. Whoever these people were, they hadn't stood a chance against the Vraxen, but why target such a small, seemingly insignificant outpost? Then he noticed something unusual. In the center of the settlement stood a large metal door embedded into the side of the cliff. Unlike the rest of the structures, it appeared untouched, its surface smooth and gleaming despite the surrounding destruction. A keypad glowed faintly beside it, suggesting it required a code to open. Daniel frowned. If the Vraxen had attacked this place specifically, it was likely because of whatever lay behind that door. He examined the keypad closely, searching for any clues. Then he spotted it. A faint indentation near the bottom corner, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. Using a small tool from his belt, Daniel pried the panel loose, revealing a tangle of wires inside. He worked quickly, bypassing the lock with practiced ease. Moments later, the door hissed open, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Drawing his flashlight, Daniel stepped inside. The air was cool and damp, carrying a metallic tang that made his skin crawl. The walls were lined with pipes and cables humming faintly with energy. At the end of the corridor, a single light flickered above a heavy steel door. This time, the door opened without resistance. Beyond it lay a laboratory, its equipment scattered and broken. Monitors displayed static, and papers covered the floor, torn and crumpled. In the center of the room stood a containment chamber, its glass cracked and splintered, and inside the chamber, a figure lay motionless. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart pounding. Through the shattered glass, he could see a young woman, her blonde hair matted with blood. She was unconscious but alive, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Who are you?" Daniel murmured, scanning the room for answers. His eyes landed on a nearby console, its screen still active. He tapped a few keys, pulling up a series of files labeled in a language he didn't recognize. But one word stood out repeatedly. Subject: Alpha. Scrolling further, he found fragments of text translated into English. Genetic experiment. Enhanced abilities. Unpredictable behavior. Daniel's jaw tightened. Whatever this woman was, she wasn't human. Not entirely. And if the Vraxen had come looking for her, it meant she was important. Dangerous, even. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her blue eyes locked onto Daniel, wide with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she asked hoarsely. "You're safe," Daniel said, keeping his tone calm. "For now. Do you know what happened here?" She blinked, slowly, as if trying to piece together fragmented memories. "They attacked. The others tried to protect me." "Why were they after you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't remember." Daniel studied her carefully. Whether she was telling the truth or not, he couldn't afford to take chances. "We need to move," he said finally. "This place isn't safe." She nodded weakly, allowing him to help her to her feet. Her movements were unsteady, but she managed to follow him back toward the exit. Outside, the silence remained oppressive, broken only by the distant howl of wind. Daniel kept his rifle raised, his senses on high alert. They needed shelter and answers. Hours later, they reached a cave hidden among the cliffs. Daniel set up a small camp using supplies from his pack to tend to the woman's injuries. She sat quietly, watching him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Ava," she replied softly. "Ava," Daniel repeated. "Do you remember anything about yourself? Where you came from?" "I remember being different," Ava said, her gaze dropping to her hands, stronger, faster, but also unstable. "Unstable how?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Sometimes I lose control. Things happen. Bad things." Daniel leaned back, processing her words. Enhanced abilities. Unpredictable behavior. It matched the notes he'd read in the lab. Whoever Ava was, she wasn't just a victim of the Vraxen's attack. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous, but for now, she was his responsibility. "We'll figure it out," Daniel said firmly. "Together." Ava looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've seen what happens when good people give up," Daniel replied. "And I'm not ready to let that happen again." As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, forcing them deeper into the cave. Daniel built a fire, its flickering light casting shadows on the walls. Ava sat close, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to ward off more than just the cold. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. "Find a way to stop them," Daniel said, staring into the flames. "The Vraxen. Whatever they're planning, we can't let it succeed." "And me?" Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "That depends on you." Ava nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Daniel allowed himself a moment of rest. But even as he closed his eyes, he knew the battle was far from over. Somewhere out there, the Vraxen were regrouping, and sooner or later they would come for Ava again. When they did, Daniel would be ready.